Hi Eli and Maddie, Daddy here again. I hope and trust you guys are still well, as always. I figured it was about time I finally got started on that long-mooted vlog about writing, on writing I suppose. But just before I do, here is the famous Once Upon a Time in America poster, which I mentioned in a couple of previous vlogs. Anyway, one of the reasons, there's a couple, one of the reasons why I've delayed doing this vlog for a good while is because I was waiting for something that has now arrived. Well, I shall tell you what it is. I don't know if you recall, right back at the beginning of the first lockdown, I say first because it's looking like there may be subsequent ones. However, right back at the beginning, many moons ago, are we talking 7 months now? So anyway, right back in March, a scientist friend of mine who is also a children's author and illustrator called me up and said, I'm thinking of doing a book for children. I think the demographic was 4 to 7, explaining how viruses work with a particular focus on corona. And could she use my face from a photo from my childhood as the face of coronavirus? Of course, I said, yes, that would be fabulous. And it is here, Ezzy the Virus, a wonderfully charming book for children. You can order your copy from TSL Books. You can go online to their website. But it's a fabulous book, and I'm very proud to be the face of coronavirus. In fact, this particular illustration was modelled on this photo. But of course, one can't have a virus quite as pretty as I was at, I think, 5 that was. So what Rachel Hayward, the author, has done is made me a little more impish, a little more rapscallion, to capture the spirit of the coronavirus. My particular favourite pages are when I become highly infectious and begin proliferating. You can see lots of Ezzies. But it's a charming book and highly informative. So for those of you who do have children, order your copy of Ezzy the Virus from TSL Books. So, although I am not a scientist in any way, shape or form, I felt it just that this should join the other books in the cupboard that I have actually written. Or for you, of course, my first poetry collection, which I'm in. Another little poetry collection there. I was one of the featured authors in Orphans of Albion, which is a fabulously well produced book. And then second most importantly, my very first collection of short stories, Losing Henry, with that beautiful picture of me on the back there, which was my first really mature book, I feel. The poetry was kind of youthfully solemn. This is a grown-up book. The reason why I mentioned this and why I'm doing the On Writing vlog is that once again, at the beginning of lockdown back in March, there was no prospect of any of my own books appearing in the near future. However, a couple of months in, I did procure, amazingly, a publishing deal. Actually, funnily, the second publishing deal for my new book, Fairy Tales and Oddities. This book was actually technically finished. It was quite long. It was a good 200 pages when me and your mum split up. So although there was a deal in place there, I didn't have any of my things. I didn't even have the computer with it on. So unfortunately that deal fell through. However, a new publisher has taken it on, and it will be published in the new year coming up. And it has been extensively rewritten. I scrapped a good 70 pages and added a whole new thing in it, and combined a couple of longer stories into one. And, you know, it's become a very different beast from what it originally was. Well, and of course, because I'm in a very different place in my life than I was back then. The very first words of Fairy Tales and Oddities were put to paper, I think, all the way back in 2011 when I was on holiday in Estonia, in the wonderful city of Tallinn, which enchanted me so much that I started writing a lovely story there. So yes, that will be out in the new year with fabulous illustrations by the wonderful artist Steve Poulakeres. So it's almost inevitable that your practical introduction to actually writing will come in the form of writing essays in school. We had to write an awful lot of essays in school on a wide range of subjects. And we had to do it longhand. You can actually do it on the computer. Of course, this wouldn't have been the case if you'd continued to grow up with me. But you're not allowed any of my experience in writing or music or anything else. And that's not to mention the love bit. But anyway, you're not allowed that, so there's no point in dwelling on regrets now. In the year we were allowed together, and we did most everything together, I babbled to you constantly and you babbled to me constantly. About whatever we fancied babbling about, including writing. I did babble to you a little about writing. Of course, understanding didn't come into it because you were a tiny baby, although a tiny baby getting rapidly larger, your growth was exponential. But I've always maintained and still maintain that it's important to keep up that near constant communication with babies because it builds their confidence subconsciously. So that when they come to be older and actually have to present themselves vocally, they're less worried about words. So what I would say, one thing about the essay, and this is a rule particular to the essay, it does not apply to creative writing, although it can. But the one rule, and of course there are hundreds and hundreds of thousands, you can go on ad infinitum about rules for good writing. But this vlog, and any subsequent ones I may choose to or feel like doing, is really just my favourite rules and ones that I always observe. And don't forget, of course, it's very healthy to observe the fact that rules are there often to be broken. But anyway, my one thing for essays is always try and make sure that the last line of each paragraph presages or presages, no one can quite agree on the correct pronunciation of this these days. I prefer presages because, like presagio in the Italian, it has a more melancholy ring to it. But anyway, always make sure that that last line presages the first line of the following paragraph, and of course subsequently the subject matter that that paragraph is going to be dealing with. Some writers have taken this to an absurd extreme. There are one or two rather tiresome people who actually use the last word to be the first word of it. I mean, that's just obsessive. That's crossed the line in the sand. That can't even see the line in the sand anymore. It's off the line in the sand into tropical tundra regions. And, the same goes for quantities. So you don't need a subclause or, that repeats in the next bit. Let it be known that you have a form and a plan, and that you've thought it through, because that always reads better in essays. Watch your hads. Also, learn where you should use that and where you should use which. They're not just interchangeable, as some people think, although in places they can be, but learn which one's which and where they belong. I like to tell a story, although it's not entirely true. There's more to it than this, but it's fun. I went out with a girl and ended up having a fairly long and fruitful relationship with her because on our first date she used the phrase "between you and me" and not the maddening "between you and I," which is what everybody seems to say these days. Each time I hear it, it's like a paper cut to my soul. I'll give you a further example. The other week I read in a piece of journalism A brisk wind carried the dog and I to the top of the hill. Now, at first glance, you might think, well, that's perfectly acceptable. No, it is not. All you have to do is take out the so and so bit in the middle, the bit that doesn't need to be there, and then your ear should do it for you. So without the so and so bit, a brisk wind carried I to the top of the hill. Now, you'd never say that, would you? Stay in the tense. Try not to fall into the trap of adding to words which are already perfectly adequate. For example, the preposition among often these days gets turned into amongst. Why? I mean, that one in particular I would also call a genteelism. A genteelism is where you change a word because you think it makes you, the writer, sound more posh. Why you would want to do this, I do not know. A common example of this is regardless, which is often turned into irregardless. The word irregardless is meaningless. Likewise, the perfectly serviceable while becomes whilst. I mean, whilst is so ugly. And there are adverbs, people adding to adverbs, people abusing adverbs. I've heard of a dentist who says open widely. I mean, what's wrong with open wide? There was a famous actress who ended her Oscar acceptance speech with the phrase lastly but not leastly. I mean, what nextly? All writing, or good writing, is a war against cliché. Those ready packaged dead phrases that come along, from the small ones like bitterly cold or stiflingly hot, to the slightly longer phrases. And one of these longer phrases is everybody has a novel in them. Well-known phrase, completely dead phrase. And it's also an untrue phrase. It's surprising to find how many cliches are actually completely untrue. What everyone has in them is actually a memoir. And I guess with all these vlogs, and we're coming up on the 8-hour mark now, I guess that's what I'm doing for you in these vlogs. Leaving a memoir, but in a new way, I guess. And I should say the point of a memoir is, no matter what's happened in the past, the point of a memoir is to show all your nearest and dearest in the best possible light. Thus, of course, this vlog has been predominantly comic in nature, telling the crazy stories, etc. And I've left out all the bad stuff, or most of the bad stuff, as much as I could, without failing to make sense. The bad stuff can wait.
I don't feel alright in spite